Hey, Wasseem,
Hey,
how you doing?
hey, how are you? Good to see you. Been a while.
Good to see you. Yeah, it's been a minute. We're live, by the way. I know I told you that on email, but just a reminder.
Oh,
We have
okay.
like half a
How do you
dozen or so
actually
people
know when
watching.
you're live? I guess it's just okay in the corner it says there.
Yeah, well, I'm just streaming it through OBS, so this is just as if a normal Google Meet, but it's broadcasting.
Cool.
Yeah,
Very nice.
nice. Thanks for joining. I appreciate you taking the time.
Definitely, yeah. No, I've watched a couple of your episodes, so I thought it'd be nice to join sometime and chat about fish work.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's a nice fish jumper you're wearing, is it?
See it. That's one of
Oh
our
yeah,
own.
okay.
I'm always branded or representing somehow.
Nice. That's ethical seafood research jumper, is it?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Fantastic, fantastic.
Also, uh, it's always branded.
Nice. All right, cool. Well, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself, your organization, your background, and everything for people who might not know who you are?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Wasseem Emam. I am an aquatic ecologist by trade. I've been working with fish for or aquatic animals for the last 17 years now, I guess. Uh, I'm also the founder of Ethical Seafood Research. We advocate for improving the welfare standards for aquatic animals that are in the food system. So that's mostly aquaculture, but we do some fisheries as well. And I'm from Egypt originally, so we have a big program there working with tilapia farmers. That's the main species that's farmed in Egypt. And we're actually also doing a lot of seaweed work lately in Tanzania and parts of East Africa, which is exciting because, I guess it is a lot more people can get behind that, as opposed to like sort of promoting more animal farming, which is something that we get falsely accused of a lot. I don't think we intend to. It's just we're trying to improve current systems, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. And we've worked on a welfare or a project about improving welfare of fish. And then the seaweed stuff, I guess, is more like alternative proteins, basically, right?
Yeah, so alternative livelihoods, actually, in that sense, were sort of fishing communities that use
Mm,
activity or fish farming. Some are getting into fish farming. So if it's just for a livelihood, then we are using the lens of why not think about something like seaweed, which has other benefits for, the environment around it and carbon sequestration, depending on the species and so on. Yeah, so it's more
okay.
alternative options.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. And I know there's some other work going on about different options for would-be livestock farmers. So I guess it's in a similar vein to that, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Exactly. Actually, I think seaweed, of course, yes, there's many ways you can consume it in diet, but unfortunately, to really make it an interesting livelihood currently, there's always like applications for using it as fertilizer, using it as a feed for other animals, using it for cosmetics. There's a lot of cosmetics there where you can use the carrageenan and different components of things you can extract from seaweed. There's biofuels, I believe, even you can, yeah, it's all kinds of applications. So I think that's where the exciting thing is well. But like plastics that can be made from like components of different algae that, so I think so there's like multiple strands. One of using seaweed as nutrition or food directly, which for now is still limited in scope. Asian um, societies, I think, are it's more ingrained there to eat seaweed as part of their lifestyle. But there's so many different seaweeds that no one eats currently, but there's huge potential. Yeah.
Damn, okay, that's super interesting. You don't really think of seaweed as being. I mean, I guess seaweed is a broad category, and there's a bunch of kind of different breeds within that, right? Which I've never really thought about before. Yeah.
Huge, huge. Actually, so I think I'm fairly new to seaweed as well, so I'm learning. I think people in the field they call it sea moss because they feel like seaweed makes it sound like it's a bad thing, like it's
Interesting.
unwanted.
Okay.
But there's thousands of species of like, yeah, and of course there's freshwater ones and marine ones. The marine ones are the ones that are all the hype, but yeah, they can vary substantially.
All right, there you go. So you're learning all about seaweed now for the new set of projects. That's cool.
So
Um,
actually, can I ask you a question? Since
please.
because I'm obviously new to the space of alternative proteins. I don't know if there's a definition, but could seaweed classify as alternative protein in that sense? Or because I think the protein content is low, but there's still some in there for sure.
Yeah, I was going to say it's presumably not high protein. I guess it depends who you ask. When I talk about alternative proteins, I'm talking about direct analogues to animal products for the most part. So plant-based meat, cultivated meat, fermentation-derived, dairy alternatives and stuff like this.
Right.
Depending on the context, I'm often not talking about like non-animal product analogs. So, legumes or nuts could be an alternative protein, source of protein, and it's not meat. That's not normally what I'm talking about in terms of alternative proteins. The other exclusion I would make is, and then tofu and stuff like that, I guess, is kind of borderline. It's like culinarily used instead of meat, right? But not directly analogous. And then the other exception I would make that some people would include in the category is insects, which again, it's like an unconventional form of protein, I guess. But yeah, as far as I'm concerned, it's animal farming and it counts as right. But yeah, no, that's a fair question, and I think different people have different parameters and places where they draw the line for alternative proteins. For seaweed, yeah, I guess as consumed, I would probably not necessarily call it an alternative protein in a strict sense, but I'm sure there could be seaweed-derived plant-based fish and stuff like that, for example, right?
Yeah, right. Okay, yeah. So all the cell-grown or lab-grown, seafood alternatives are alternative proteins, right?
Yeah, for cultivated seafood, yeah, I would say so.
Okay, because it's a term that is bandied about a lot, and of course, I don't work in that world so much, so I don't actually know when it qualifies as properly something. Like even when you're asked to select on a form, like the area that you work in, I never select alternative proteins because I feel like I don't know enough to. So I think that's kind of what got me thinking. Would the seaweed qualify us a bit? But yeah.
Fair, yeah, no, it's an interesting consideration. It's interesting, like different applications in different fields beyond food as well. I would say probably as is, not necessarily, but you're coming at it from like a livelihoods perspective anyway, like this is what to do instead of fish farming, as opposed to this is what to eat instead of fish, right?
Definitely.
But yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Actually, all of our work is producer facing, and I don't think I've ever done anything consumer facing except for like one survey with Animal Welfare League on, that chicken and fish survey that Fondlytics developed. I suppose you might.
That rings a bell, yeah.
I think it's been adapted for multiple areas, so we've been doing that for Egypt, and that's the only time I've ever asked people about like dietary preferences and sort of when would they consider fish to be sentient and so on.
Oh, that's so interesting. Okay, so almost everything you do is producer facing, huh? Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah, it's a strength. I mean, because we have a more like technical background, we understand how the farming process works and so on. So it feels like it just plays on your strength. But there's no reason why if I learned a bit more on how to work with consumer facing, for example, sometimes when I see your materials and conversations that you have with people about challenging pro meat industry people, for example, if I had all of that knowledge, I think it could be a lot more comfortable going to conversations and be able, like having the facts, and so yeah, I've never really worked with consumers.
Fair enough. Yeah. Do you know what's interesting with the debates? They always are a good opportunity for me to learn and study and revise certain topics. It's like having an exam, basically, isn't it? I'm going to go and do a thing that tests my knowledge on this particular topic, and so I'll spend a few days kind of swatting up and looking at the different studies on the topic and stuff like this, which is great because I've done debates on topics where I'm like pretty knowledgeable about it, but then once I look into it for the purposes of debate, I'm like, wow, there's so much that I didn't know about this. So it's a good learning opportunity as well once you've gotten locked in, Yeah.
That you've done some like pretty interesting debates with people around the Dublin Declaration and so on, right?
Yeah. Paul Wood, that was like the second debate that I did, and maybe my favourite so far, to be honest, because that was the closest to my area of obsession that I could get, and that was one where I didn't need to revise too much for that, because I thought, I already know a lot about this. But then we also spoke about another study which he likes to cite about red meat and health, so I looked into that a little bit. But yeah, no, it's pretty good doing the debates. It's a good source of motivation to learn about a topic, and then it's a good format for people to interact with and learn about the topic as well. And you're kind of simulating the conversations that people will then have in the wild. That's the hope. If enough people watch the debate, they kind of know, they learn the talking points in a format that's quite engaging, and then they can go forward and deploy those same points in conversations that they're having as well. So that's the hope.
So the one that I know you've been trying to pin down, Frederick, I think.
Yeah, Freddie Leroy.
Did you ever get him anywhere?
No luck there. Someone in my YouTube audience did message him on Twitter with my website, how long has Frederick Leroy avoided ChrisBryant.com, and he replied to that. So that was actually the first time, I think, that he's acknowledged or said anything about me or to me. He's never spoken to me, but he eventually blocked me on LinkedIn, so he won't interact with me at all. But yeah, if that happens, that'd be a big get. That'd make my year if I get to talk to Freddie Leroy, because he did a debate about the Dublin Declaration, I guess, last year, and didn't do well in it. So yeah. Yeah. This a lady called Irina Herzon, who also wrote a rebuttal paper to the Dublin Declaration. And in advance of that debate, I was very nervous that she might be very polite and proper and academic. She's a lecturer, I guess. And I'd said to her on email, don't be too polite about it, because he's going to try and talk around it and talk his way out of it and not address the point and so on. So that you will have to kind of pin him down and say, look, just answer this. And she did it twice in the debate, or at least twice, which I thought I was buzzing from that. Honestly, that was a great conversation.
That's so cool. So he is willing to discuss the issues, but for some reason he won't talk to you.
That seems to be the case. I mean, I think he did this one debate hosted by some sort of livestock organization. They had Irina Herzon, and I think he probably thought, as I did, that she would be quite polite and not interrupt him and let him get away with saying whatever he wanted, basically. And then the summary that livestock organization posted of the debate was also very inaccurate, in my view. Didn't mention that Frederick Leroy agreed that we need to reduce the scale of livestock agriculture, for example. That was like the main point in contention in the debate, and he didn't have anything to say to push back against that. And he said twice that we need to reduce the scale of animal agriculture, but in the summary conveniently left that out. So I think it was very much on their venue and on their terms and everything else. But anyway, I'd love to talk about Freddie Leroy all day, believe me. But I've got a lot of questions about fish and aquaculture and everything else written for you.
No, it's just I just thought of it when you were talking about alternative proteins.
100%, yeah. So yeah, fantastic. Thanks again for joining. I'm really, really pleased to have you sharing some stuff that ethical seafood research is doing. Aquatic animals are the most numerically farmed group of at least vertebrates on the planet, but there's a sense, and I think this is correct, they still get a small fraction of all of the attention and funding in animal advocacy in general, compared to land animals, basically. Why do you think that fish are so invisible in the movement, and how can we change that?
Within the movement, or just broadly speaking? Because I think there's definitely two things going on. But go ahead.
Fair enough. Okay. Yeah. Well, both. If you think that there's different things going on.
Yeah. Also, I'm just curious because you said vertebrates. Obviously, if you look at crustaceans, that would be a whole other layer, and the numbers are huge there. No, but you asked your question specifically for vertebrates. Because I actually, well, within EA, it looks like shrimp are so fashionable and sexy, and like sometimes us fish people think like, how come they get all the attention, right?
Oh,
But
that's so interesting. Yeah, yeah, makes sense.
yeah, so I guess the question, like more broadly speaking, why are aquatic animals invisible is obviously that sort of in evolutionary distance. There's that. I remember the first time I saw a fish out of water and it wasn't making sound, for example. The fact that they don't make sound when they're like obviously in agony or at least like asphyxiating in air, because very few species air breathe. I don't think you'd immediately recognize it, or like uh, it just doesn't feel like the same kind of, like a pig. I always hear that when pigs are being slaughtered, they make horrible noises, and other land animals. So I think that's already one thing that for me always struck me as like, it's easy for people to say, oh, they don't feel, and they look so different from us. I think also it's easy. So, within animal welfare science, you have, of course, land animals. Almost all the indicators involve looking at the animal or having access to being able to see the animal. All like you look at their teeth, you look at their external features, you look at behavior with fish, or like obviously we use fish as a general term for aquatic animals. But if you're seeing them, generally speaking, it means you're doing something, either like you're taking them out of water, which they don't want to be out, or it's very clear water, and that means that it's probably at most aquaculture installations, the water is not that clear unless you're diving around it or something. So it's not that easy to see them. Of course, now with like underwater cameras and AI technology, you can see fish like salmon, for example. They have a lot of really, really expensive and neat technology that helps you see them, and that maybe bridges the distance a bit. So I guess what I'm saying is it's easy to forget about something when you're not seeing it at all. Like we always call it invisible suffering, right? So not only have we dehumanized them and we can't hear them, but we also can't see them a lot of the time. So I think that's more generally speaking. Now, more within the movement, I suppose there are, I suppose there is no, we haven't got, they always talk about like the cage-free alternative for aquatic animals. Apart from like, the way to, sorry, I'm going to make it use simpler words, but apart from electrical stunning or some kind of slaughter method for shrimp, which is humane, for fish, there's so much debate still about whether this is actually improving or not improving, or if it is done properly. And so we don't have any real interventions that we can all like rally behind and be very confident that this is actually improving welfare in the same way that cage-free seems to kind of be something that many funders can get behind. So I think that's a big issue we've had as well, from a movement perspective. I think shrimp have done better because at least both ice slurry and electrical stunning can be very effective for shrimp. And I don't want to use the word humane because there's still discussion about that, but it can be less cruel or less suffering, cause less suffering. So yeah, but it's definitely, the scale is huge for sure. And if you look at, I know you're very familiar with the numbers, but the numbers of like projected increase of all aquatic animals is the scale of increase, like the rate and the projected is just crazy. Like there's only going to be so much more of it according to projections.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I really like the point about not being able to hear them. That is not something I thought about, but yeah, I guess fish for the most part don't make sound, or certainly sound that we can hear, and so there's no screaming in the slaughterhouse kind of thing, right? It's kind of harder to interpret that suffering. That's a really, really interesting point. I hadn't thought about that before. So you originally an ecologist, and I think you were working in conservation, right, before you were doing the farmed fish or the fish welfare stuff. What was the moment or realization that made you want to pivot and reorient your career?
Yeah, I didn't realize that you knew a bit about my background. That's really nice to.
Yeah, there you go.
So I always say that it was a work placement I was doing in Canada. So I did my undergraduate degree in Toronto, University of Toronto, and we had to do like 3 work placements as part of my course in environmental sciences. And the last one, I think it was kind of a fluke that I just was matched with the Ministry of Environment in the province of Ontario. And now they have what they call the Sport Fish Contaminant Monitoring Program. So every year the government basically publishes a guide on the safe levels of fish to eat from various bodies of water, because angling is a huge recreational activity, but also I think there are communities who truly live off, like at least it's a part of their diet. So this guide is published and is used by communities all around the province. Now, to get the information for that, there's a team that goes out and sort of samples all these different places, and well, sorry, I should say quote unquote samples. They take samples of fish from different areas, and that's what I was a technician assisting a senior scientist in collecting the samples. And I just remember I'd never really worked with fish in that way, but you know, if you know what you're doing and you have the right gear, which you usually do, so if you take a seine net, as they call it, and you go to a place where like, you know, juvenile fish are are sheltering, basically, you can just catch thousands, you know. So I remember every time we'd go, we'd only need to have 30 or 40 for this particular location, and we would get hundreds, if not more. And all I could see was all these fish that were like being taken out that I just wanted to put them back as fast as possible. And my supervisor was like, no, focus on the task, get all the other ones. And I could realize that, like, I instinctively could see that this was not a good thing for the other fish. And it got me thinking about how vulnerable aquatic animals are, especially inland freshwater. You know, the water levels recede, the fish don't really have anywhere to go. There's so many contaminants and like anthropogenic sources of pollution into these areas anyway, anywhere around the world. And it just made me really less blind to a problem. And ever since then, I can't not see that aquatic animals have it particularly hard. Maybe I'm comparing them as like birds that can fly away, or, you know, land animals that have a lot more places to. Of course, that's generalizing, but so that was sort of how I got into freshwater fish and conservation work. And but you know, the thing is, there's not that many jobs. Like, you know, marine biologists can dive and do all this like sexy shark work, but there's not actually too many jobs in that world. And somehow you end up finding yourself doing either fisheries or aquaculture sustainability work. Did some environmental assessments. I worked at the FAO in Rome for a bit, but again, that's very food oriented. I felt like it was just sort of helping use fish and aquatic animals as resources, because that's really how they're treated in so much of global discourse. Actually, I always say that in Arabic, the word that like fisheries is actually called fish resources or fish wealth. It's seen as a wealth that a country has. It just doesn't, like, even having conversations with people about, you know, okay, yes, fine, we're privileged to have them, but they're not just a resource, they're also like sentient beings, and those two things can be true at the same time. So I suppose when I found out about the welfare work within aquaculture, it felt like a good fit, because it's still more biology than just, you know, trying to help fisheries stock assessment, like how do we exploit fisheries in a better way. And I don't know, still not the happiest place, but it just feels like kind of I'm still working with aquatic animals, which is what I wanted to do, but maybe a bit less on the industry side. Of course, we work with industry, but, you know, not within it, so adjacent.
Yeah, that's so cool. I appreciate that you do generally have like a unique empathy for fish as well, and I like the point about they're kind of stuck in the water that we're sticking shit into in a way that is not. It's not quite viscerally the same case for other animals, right? It feels so obvious just when like they're in this lake or whatever, and there's no getting away from that, and we're putting a pollution in there and other stuff that's affecting the water quality. Like, yeah, they're really at our mercy on a different level. I guess it's, yeah, you can think about it a little bit differently in the ocean, maybe, but even then, it's very, there's a sense that it's very like one way. We can affect them, they really can't affect us. But yeah.
I'm just thinking, do you ever like read about these studies, like in London, for example, in the Thames, after like a weekend, always they find like levels of narcotic, like class A drugs in the,
Right.
So like, and that's after it's been through the water treatment system. Can you believe that even like
Right.
the most sophisticated water treatment processes still discharge, well, they are contaminants really. They might not be lethal or, very toxic, but there's so my wife actually, one of her first postdocs was on an EU-funded project looking at pharmaceutical residue that from human bodies that ends in the waterways. Like antidepressants and like they end up in fish, of course. There's all kinds of studies. It's quite wild, really, when you think about it. That it's not, we're not doing it to harm them, but it's like they're just affected by that. Yeah. Sorry, I just thought that was a very concrete example when you were saying that.
100%. Yeah. The medical residues, I guess. Yeah. No, that's, and you can imagine that it's affecting them. I mean, it's compound. I mean, probably affects them differently to affecting humans, I guess. But it's compounds that are like, psychoactive or whatever. Bioactive.
Yeah.
Hormones. Right. Yeah. And so then your current your organization, Ethical Seafood Research, I think it was founded after a residency with the EA community in Zanzibar. Is that right? Nice.
Yeah.
And then, so how was that experience, and how did that kind of shape what Ethical Seafood became?
So I guess it was more, that's when it took the form that it's in now. But I'd already registered. I was a consultant really for the years before that. We were applying for EU projects. I was working in the European Parliament, and I was basically realized that I was reviewing a lot of these reports that members of Parliament were commissioning within the Fisheries Committee, of course. And a lot of the consultants' reports were similar to the kind of things that I thought I could be doing. And I asked some of the consultants, like, how do I get into this line of work? And you told me, like, first thing you do is you register as an entity, so you're not applying as an individual. And so I'd already had Ethical Seafood Research as a name and as a registered limited company. And then, so when I got the opportunity to spend some time in Zanzibar, I was already kind of like, becoming familiar with the EA work and the principles and so on. I liked it, but I wasn't really involved in it. And I spent a couple of months in Zanzibar, and we had to sort of think about which cause area we could work in and what we could do. And I had, like, it was one of the few times I actually had time to just think about, well, what do I want to do work on? And I had calls with people in Kenya who were very keen to have us do something on fish welfare there. So there was someone there that he was my first employee basically, and he was really, really like, yeah, we can do this. And I was not convinced about running. Like, basically, we became a nonprofit, a fish welfare charity of sorts. But that wasn't the vision I had at the time. I really never saw myself running an organization that way. But Zanzibar, we were also working with the government, and I realized that we had kind of an advantage there that, like, high-level players were willing to work with us. So within an EA context, how can we use that to, affect change on a large scale? And that's kind of shaped some of the policy work we've done since then, and we still have some work in Zanzibar. Obviously, we delivered the aquaculture strategy for them last year, which came out of the residency. Really, that was like a building on that. But the outcome of that was, focus less on fish, which is what they wanted to do. They wanted to get, like, everyone tells them, oh yeah, fish is the future. Clearly, they have an advantage in seaweed farming. They're already doing it. They're already very good at it, but they haven't got anywhere near the maximum value they can extract from that industry. So, through evidence-based stakeholder consultations, we showed them that actually they really don't need to start investing in fish farming. So that was a cool, like, little finding from a project that, in the beginning, I thought, well, why am I even helping them with strategy? That's not really the kind of work that I want to be doing. So yeah, the residency sort of maybe think about, well, Africa, first of all, is one of the forgotten places within a lot of the animal welfare movement anyway. But actually, I don't know about terrestrial animals, but from an aquaculture perspective, it's the fastest growing for sure. So the sector is growing really fast. And there's a lot of funding from the World Bank and other financial institutions to grow that further. So it felt like the right time, you know, and of course, I've seen the work that you've done with AAA and others. Is it okay if I abbreviate for your audience? But
Yeah.
like intensification and how to get in before certain practices set in, and that definitely holds true for aquaculture. Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. Now I was gonna say, I was gonna talk about salmon as an interesting case study, but what were you gonna say?
Yeah, no, please go on. Yeah, tell me about salmon.
I was gonna say that having been like, you know, educated and trained within an aquaculture or sort of you know, I guess I'd like drank the Kool-Aid of industry people for long enough that we were always taught that salmon farming was some of the most high welfare, or at least the most advanced form of aquaculture. And as a result, but there's so much more money in salmon farming than there are in other species. But as a result of it being more advanced, you always think, oh, it must mean higher welfare. And I think that's a mistake industry people make. But actually, the last few years, as I got more into it and sort of spoke to people in that space, I started realizing it's actually one of the areas where the welfare is worst for various reasons. And I think the curtain's being drawn back on that by a number of players in that space. I don't know if you're aware of some of the different issues in salmon farming at all. Or
the big thing that comes to mind for me at the moment with salmon farming is Animal Equality UK's work on the Scottish salmon farms. And they have a lot of lice, right? That's one of the major welfare issues for salmon. You get the lice in aquaculture, and they are getting eaten alive basically by little bugs, basically, right?
Exactly. And of course, you know about the cleaner fish that they put in with the salmon, and these fish eat lice. But the welfare of those fish is not particularly good. And so there's a whole issue around cleaner fish use as a way of treating the sea lice problem. But it's kind of like throwing more problems, like throwing things at problems instead of just, you know, asking ourselves whether, I mean, I always attend industry events and listen to the narrative that they give for justifying certain things. It used to always be food security initially with a lot of aquaculture, including salmon, which is ridiculous. You know, I know in your line of work, obviously, that's 10 times more ridiculous, but for us, salmon is not essential for food security. Come on, let's be honest. And then they started using the argument of anti-obesity because, you know, they were being faced, like they knew they couldn't continue to say food security was the issue. Now, I don't see how salmon, like anyone in their right mind can debunk that argument, right? It's not even like a well thought of justification. Instead of just saying we like the taste of salmon, we like sashimi, you know, they just kind of have to find justifications for it. So it became anti-obesity, and then now it's like some kind of nutrient, like micronutrient deficiency, or of course the omega-3s and stuff, but we know that there's better sources. So it just seems like an unnecessary industry in many ways compared when you look at the consequences of it. But, you know, the Scottish government, as you say, animal equality, is such a source of pride for them, you know, like the name salmon is something that's synonymous with quality, and it's one of their biggest industries, biggest exports at least. So it'd be very hard to get them to look at it critically and sort of shut it down. They might, you know, restrict it and regulate it more, but shutting it down would be like a kind of identity thing, you know, and that's tricky. So I was just talking about salmon in the sense of like the more I discover things, the more I realize actually like there's so many issues with it. So I was just on a podcast last year, and do you know Farah Amber?
That definitely rings a bell.
Yeah, so I did a piece with her last year in Ava, Africa, and she put out a reel like a couple of months ago, and that was probably the thing that the one thing that I've been involved in that's got that much attention from me personally, like people even I know said to me, I didn't realize that about salmon. So I was talking about how 50% of salmon, or up to 50% of salmon that are farmed in intensive systems are like deaf, and a large percentage of them have heart defects. And when you like from a veterinary perspective, and I work with a lot of vets, of course, in the case of land animals, that would be a problem. But somehow it's just kind of not talked about. I didn't even know it. I thought I was, fairly knowledgeable in this space, but that kind of resonated with a lot of people when I said, can you imagine that we're raising these animals? It's okay if they can't hear because they're going to be killed in a year anyway. I guess maybe terrestrial animal people can tell me more if that's like shocking or not. But yeah, so salmon farming, I'm more and more becoming sort of like just strengthening my position, arguing with industry people about.
Yeah, it's so interesting the arguments that are impactful for institutional decision makers, because you can't really go to a government. Governments are not that responsive to like animal suffering arguments. Basically, it's like, well, the animals can't vote, so fuck them, basically, right? But if you talk about food security or climate change, economic benefits of different industries, right? That's the way to make the case in governments. And then when you talk about individuals, it seems to be different. Actually, individuals, like people, are quite responsive to animal suffering and animal cruelty and stuff like this. Like that's the main thing that resonates with individuals. But it's almost like institutions are not set up to be responsive to those kind of arguments. It's like, well, my boss isn't going to care about that, so I don't care about it kind of attitude. And ultimately, but there are, of course, different things that you can focus on: environmental impacts and food security, as you mentioned, which is an interesting that was kind of used by the fish industry, saying in this case. And I especially like the economic thing that you said about the seaweed industry and strategizing and saying, look, this is where there's a comparative advantage compared to other countries, and why don't you go in this direction instead? That's something that I know what you're saying, that it feels very like technical or kind of removed from the type of work that you might have imagined you'd be doing. But most likely the expected impact of that could be millions of animals, right? If that influences the government to just say, okay, we're going to invest more in the seaweed production, less in the fish production, that could be absolutely huge.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, I mean, I always try to be opportunistic, in that sense, and like not support the things and be like, okay, well, let's take an open mind and see what comes out of that, So yeah, I think that one, I definitely grateful that I just like went with it. Yeah,
100%. It's quite cool as well. We have, there's like echoes of my background in yours as well in terms of your origin story. Yeah, I mean, I really resonate with what you said about when you had your first employee and them being very much, believing in it and we can do it and so on, because it is quite an unusual thing, I suppose, starting your own organization. And there's a big part of like, I know that this is just me on my laptop, and I assume other people know that, and it doesn't quite feel real. But when you have an employee, oh, hello there.
It's that time of day. Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, no worries at all.
Yeah. Do you ever have live kids on your show?
Well, I think that's a first, actually. I think that's a first. Hello.
Chris.
Baby,
okay,
baby, who wants
give me a few more minutes.
A baby sleeping.
Give me a few more minutes, okay? Sorry. We're recording. Can you give me a few minutes, please?
I'll try not to keep you too long from your family, Wasseem. Sorry about that.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, go ahead. You were saying?
No worries, yeah. Just when you have an employee then, and then now there's somebody who the story for them isn't like, oh, this is just some guy that's made up a logo. The story for them is, I'm employed by this organization, they're paying my salary. Like, do you know what I mean? They have an attitude that it's much more of a proper thing, and that kind of forces you to have an attitude that is much more of a proper thing, right? Yeah, and then lo and behold, it is a proper thing, right? When multiple people believe in it, and this is the company that I work for, and stuff like this, it's it kind of takes on a life of its own, right?
Exactly. And I think, Chris, actually back to the point at the beginning of like branding, because I'm pretty much every day of the week you'll find me with something that has like our logo or something to do with our work on it. And that kind of helps me as well, like keep that mindset of like, it's a real thing, because if you strip away the website and your people just at home at the end of the day, right? So it's hard to really feel like it's a thing. It's the people that are involved as well that make it what it is. Yeah, it's interesting.
100%. And doesn't it give you a perspective on other organizations as well, though? Because then you're like, well, they're just people learn a computer as well. They don't have anything that I don't have. Yeah, it makes you think, oh, that's whole...
First time I saw, like, especially in this space, I was in a call with people who are all like, VP of this and the head of this. And, like, obviously coming from a world where I'd never worked in a startup or like that environment, it kind of makes you like see them in a different way, it's a funny thing.
100%, yeah. I don't want to take up too much of your evening, by the way. I see your son's tugging at your attention as well. So yeah,
do you? I mean, because I know you had other questions. Like, I don't want to make it. Is there anything else we can talk about? Like,
yeah, shall I just expedite some of the more interesting ones? And you tell me when you need to leave. By the way, we're coming up on the hour already, so if you have, I'm sure you need to go and have an evening. You're also an hour ahead of me, so it's.
Exactly. How do you feel about doing a part 2 somehow? Is that something you do?
Part 2 sometime, yeah, for sure.
Or I can wear exactly the same clothes and have the same everything and just.
Yeah, you have to get your hair cut to the same length, and then I'll cut them together.
I know I have a lot of time in the beginning. Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, no worries. Well, why don't I ask you one more question? I'll let you go and have an evening with your family and everything. Speaking about like the things that the industry kind of drags out, or arguments that they're making in general. The do fish feel pain debate seems to be something that kind of gets dragged out every few years. Is that something that you know a lot about in terms of the science and what we can say about fish pain, what we know about that, what we don't know about it, and so on?
Yeah. So, I mean, this even the word sentience is hard to define for most people, and even for humans, like Michelle Lavery from Coefficient Giving, I remember her saying this to me once, that we don't know if coma patients truly feel things that we're doing to them when they're in a coma, but just out of precaution, we don't do certain things to them. And that's sort of how we should approach that issue when it comes to pain. But so have you seen these like sort of tables with like this different criteria that an animal has to meet in order to qualify as feeling pain or not feeling pain? So there's things like having nociceptors, which is a very basic thing. So like the ability to sense pain. But that could be, so people who are skeptical of fish feeling pain will always say, yeah, it could be just a reflex, like in the same way that, if you poke someone, they might do something in response, but it doesn't mean that they feel pain or like they're sentient necessarily. So there's like having nociceptors, that's one. And then like the ones that for me are more convincing are the more advanced ones. So what does an animal who feels pain then do? So many fish have shown the ability to like kind of behave differently after being exposed to painful stimuli. So that to me is kind of pretty irrefutable from a behavior, because behavior is ultimately, the component of sentience that we look at. What other ones? I'm just thinking at table now. Oh yeah, and of course, after administering analgesics, so they use paracetamol, all kinds of like lab studies, and they show that the same animals that were doing a certain behavior to avoid something after being exposed to painful stimuli actually felt like opioids. Sometimes they do that with opioids too, and they show that actually fish behave differently when they're giving opioids. They can no longer avoid certain things, and they can be hurt again almost. And it's a very similar way to maybe what a human would do. So those are the kind of studies I feel like when you look at the evidence and show it to people, it's a bit more, you can relate to it a bit more than just saying, oh, they have this physiology, or they have this like structures, and it's very hard for people to understand like what it means to have these things in the brain, and like brain waves. So one of the projects that we're doing now is how to slaughter fish in a more humane way. We're no longer doing electrical stunning in Egypt, actually. We're trying to get the industry to use ice slurry, which is what we're trying to phase out in Europe, but we're still like one step behind in much of the global south. So, you know, the idea of ice is, yes, water and ice, but a lot of ice, and the fish are immersed in it for a few seconds or a few minutes, realistically, and then taken out, and either they're put on like more ice and just transported, or you can use other slaughter methods, but this is a kind of a stunning method. So actually being able to say these fish are, you know, dead, it's really hard, even with EEG sort of equipment where, you know, like the caps they put on their brains of humans as well. But even then, there's so much discussion about, well, these waveforms, does it truly mean that the animal's unconscious, or is it just so much discussion around all of that? So I think consciousness is always going to be a very tricky subject, and of course sentience is, you know, close cousin of that in that sense. But I guess I was just saying to you that, like, it's clear the responses to pain and painful stimuli that on their own, and that result in a change of behavior that lasts, and of course they remember that in the long term. So that in itself is a reason to not cause them pain, or to be minimize the pain. Whether we can prove for a fact that they're conscious and all this is, you know, it's, I feel like it's a bit irrelevant if we clearly know that certain things are aversive to them.
Yeah, okay. Damn, okay, that's a really, really, really good answer, actually. That's a really good answer. The nociceptors thing is, I've heard of that before. I don't know loads about the biology there, but that's basically the mechanism for, like, detecting pain in animals. But then on a behavioral level, you're saying they change the behavior after pain and also seem to react to painkillers, which is pretty good evidence that there's some negative, like, aversive reaction going on. And you're absolutely right. Like, this is the thing about philosophical zombies. You ever heard that term? Where it's like you don't actually know that anybody else in the world except for you is conscious, right? You're kind of just taking that as a given, and it's a good assumption to have. But of course, we can't access the subjective experiences of others in that sense, right? That's why they're subjective. But yeah, but looking at both the physiological evidence and the behavioral evidence, it's like they definitely do seem to be feeling pain here.
I think instinctively, you know, anyone who's worked with aquatic animals, I was just talking to a friend of mine over the weekend, and Sentience, and she said, well, with my dog, I know. I'm like, well, why with your dog are you accept it as conscious and sentient and all that? Just because we don't know the language that animals are more further from us feel, doesn't mean that it's a given that they don't, you know, but they find it really hard to kind of imagine that certain animals will feel that way. Of course, these kind of stories we tell, like as the you know, goldfish that are sad when their other conspecifics are removed from their aquarium and things like that, you know, are convincing, but it's hard on the surface to kind of imagine that these animals have inner lives, as Jonathan Balcom says.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me, Wasseem. I really appreciate you. And I have a ton more questions that I would ask you if we had time. Maybe we'll do a part 2 sometime. Hey.
Yeah, definitely, and I'll come with even more, you know, studies. Like you said, you do your homework sometimes before these. Maybe I can brush up as well. And no, I also wanted to come on because, of course, I appreciate the work that we did together. And I thought, hey, you know, we should come and chat about some of that work too.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we didn't even really get to talk about that, but yeah, they'll be in the part 2, so people can watch back.
Sounds good. Well, thank you very much, Chris.
Yeah, thanks so much. All right, we'll speak soon.
Have a good one.